So, I've been playing Devil May Cry 4 for ages, and one thing that I never really thought about is how much work it takes to play as DMC4 Dante. This specific version of Dante requires way more patience than any action game out there. Even within its own franchise, it makes DMC3 or DMC5 Dante a cakewalk to learn how to play in a crazy manner. Don't get me wrong, the other Dantes are a beast to play on their own, but DMC4 Dante has this certain uniqueness that makes him really tough to play. But why exactly is he difficult to learn? He has less moves than his DMC5 counterpart, and even his DMC3 version when you factor in the Switch version having more moves compared to the DMC4 version. So what about this particular version of Dante makes learning him such a hurdle? Well, sit down, grab a tub of popcorn, and relax as I explain all the reasons why this particular version of Dante is so frustratingly difficult to learn. Now, keep in mind, the goal of this video is to explain my thought process on why I think this version of Dante can be really annoying to learn. Not that he sucks, he is a powerhouse of a character in every game that he's involved in, but I definitely remember my time picking up Devil May Cry 4 and attempting to walk the path on learning how to play Dante. And let me tell you, it was a path littered with different roads, all leading to crippling arthritis. But luckily, I took a detour to avoid all of that while still accomplishing my goal, so I'm pretty good now. And sure, getting triple S ranks can be trivial when you understand the rules behind it, but there's more to these games than only meeting a certain goal. I think it's fair to say that there are different levels of understanding of how to use a character effectively versus how to use a character in a masterful way. It's like beating Ninja Gaiden by spamming Ninpo and Ultimate techniques and then saying, oh, there's nothing more for me to understand. I understand everything. The game is simple. When there's clearly more that you can do to understand the mechanics of the game even further. Since Devil May Cry 3, Dante has been a character that always had a large repertoire of abilities and weapons that he can switch between them at certain points within a mission or even on the fly. One thing that I find to be a little odd is how potent his weapons were between DMC3 to 4 and then 5. And the weakest link to me seems like it was DMC4's iteration of Dante. I'm going to be 100% honest when I say this, but I think Dante's moveset in DMC4 is the most underwhelming I've ever had to deal with in all of Devil May Cry. While I do believe that the overall feel of DMC4 is awesome, as in like the gravity feels right, the hitboxes aren't too big or too small, animations are pretty snappy and responsive, I really dislike how underwhelming his moves are in a nutshell. In fact, I vividly remember people arguing about Dante's moves in DMC4 right when the game came out, and people were very upset. Even I was a little miffed about it too. Some moves got gutted or changed to a point where they almost feel useless to use, like Round Trip for example. In DMC3, Dante had access to a move called Sword Pierce that allows him to throw his sword at an enemy in a very quick fashion. And then on top of that, he had extra moves that he could do without his sword, so he can still attack while his sword is out damaging enemies. Then there's Round Trip, which is slow, takes a while to come out, and once when it's out, you have to wait for it to come back to use it again. You don't have access to melee attacks either, so you either need to switch to a different weapon or you need to call back the sword if you want to use it at all. Oh, and on top of all of that, the tracking absolute sucks dog crap. I can't describe how many times I have used this move and it completely missed the enemy because it has horrible tracking. And the move doesn't outright suck. It's actually kind of decent in terms of damage, but it takes so long to come out. Then there's also Gilgamesh, which is just a worse version of Beowulf. It has slow animations specifically for the first combo, a few missing moves like Zodiac and Hammer, and you lose access to Beast Uppercut as a regular command attack since it's now tied to Swordmaster. And the biggest downfall for this weapon is that in order to get good damage from it, you have to charge your attacks, which is kind of annoying. Unless you want to count double trigger distortion, which in order to do, you have to turn on double trigger the moment when an attack makes contact with an enemy, which you need double trigger meter to execute it, so unless you have unlimited double trigger, you're not going to be doing this all the time. Then there's Lucifer, which I've already talked about before. It's a freaking technical monster of a weapon, yet it feels like I'm slapping demons with a wet noodle. Like, it has decent crowd control and it does okay damage, but the tracking is again horrible, and unless you really know what you're doing, this weapon can be very cumbersome to actually get used to. And last, there are Dante's guns, which feel like complete rubbish when you stand them up to almost any DMC game. Gunslinger itself feels like a waste outside of a few moves. Like, man, I was super disappointed when I started toying around with the guns for the first time I played Dante. Like, you remember that movie, Men in Black, right? Remember when K handed Jay his weapon and Jay thought he was about to get some like badass powerhouse of a gun, right? And then he hands him that little pea shooter. Granted, the gun turned out to be strong as hell, but his reaction is how I felt about Dante's guns. They are weak and have far less practical uses. Honeycomb Fire does alright damage, but it locks you in place and it takes a bit to set up, depending on how fast you can mash. Backslide only looks cool for stylistic reasons, but you won't really be using this move very often unless you're locked onto another enemy and another enemy is behind you. Or if you can reverse the move altogether, which is an entirely different advanced mechanic that not many people are going to know how to do. Then there's the entirety of Pandora's attacks, which only a few of them are remotely useful. Pandora's Jealousy move allows you to do a lot of damage if you're in DT mode, and it kind of get rid of certain cloaks that certain enemies have, like Mephistos and Faust, but it also allows you to keep an enemy in the air as you're slowly descending to the ground. That way you can kind of like continue a combo. Revenge works really well as a crowd clearing move, same as Omen once when a disaster gauge is filled up, which takes ages for you to fill up within multiple fights. Outside of that, everything else about this weapon is extremely lackluster. Grief misses at close range and requires a lot of meter to use effectively. Augment is slow but can be somewhat useful when you want to travel around, I guess. And the missile damage kind of sucks compared to Omen. So you might be wondering why exactly I'm yapping about why DMC4 Dante's kit kind of sucked eggs. Well, it's part of the reason why he's hard to pick up. As a character, Dante's utility almost requires you to learn all of his weapons and styles in tandem so that you get the most out of them. Now, this is pretty much true for Dante as a whole, but in Devil May Cry 4, you are severely restricting yourself if you do not make use of most of Dante's useful moves. It's one of the main issues that I have about Devil May Cry 4, and it's probably one of the few reasons why a lot of people think that style switching is kind of awkward with Dante in this game. And to add on to this, Dante in Devil May Cry 4 has less moves with his styles compared to his DMC3 counterpart, which kind of makes Dante progression feels like it's moving backwards when you look at everything. Like, he takes 2 steps forward with adding style switching and the fact that you can switch through multiple weapons, but then he takes a few steps backwards because the amount of moves that he has are reduced and his styles aren't as potent as his DMC3 version or DMC5. When you think about it, it kind of adds on another layer of frustration when you consider all of the options that DMC3 Dante has. And again, I want to reiterate this, but I don't think Dante is bad. I just believe that he lacks a lot of potential compared to what I think that he could have. Speaking of frustration, I think one of the most frustrating aspects about DMC4 Dante is learning how to play as him for the very first time. Now, I've already explained to you why DMC4 Dante's kit is kind of lackluster, but what's tied to this is that you have to get used to learning 3 different weapons, 3 different guns, and 5 different styles when you unlock everything about this character. From the surface, you can kind of breeze through the game normally, but when you start getting to later difficulties, it becomes more and more necessary to start using all of your equipment, at least as much as you can. That means you might be swapping through your styles and your weapons quite frequently if you're trying to get used to everything. And then on top of that, you have to make sure that you remember what style and what weapon that you were using during that time. So this in general can make or break a person when it comes to actually wanting to learn how to play this character. Meanwhile, you have DMC3 Dante that only has 2 weapons and 2 guns that you can use at a time along with 1 style, and then there's DMC5 Dante, which you have the ability to customize your loadout for your weapons and your guns. It also doesn't help that some of Dante's moves have shifted between being a part of the base weapons kit onto a style. This means that you're going to switch through your styles even more often than you were before. And I think one of the biggest complaints that I hear about DMC4 Dante's inventory is the fact that he has a 5th style, and it is very, very easy to accidentally get into this style by pressing the same style direction that was on the D-pad of the style that you were currently in. And let me tell you, I have done this so many times that it's ingrained in my muscle memory at this point. So I've gone over Dante's move list, and I've also gone over some of Dante's equipment and how you have to manage them and how kind of cumbersome it can be. Now, I kind of want to talk about the enemies. Now, I have heard a lot of people say that the enemies aren't designed well for Dante, and I personally believe that Dante is well equipped to deal with the threats that he has faced. The problem is that there are very nuanced and very specific solutions that he has to do in order to deal with them properly. Like, take Bianco Angelo for a second. When you hit his shield with a melee attack, your character will bounce off of its shield. With Nero, all you have to do is just bust through the shield, and then you can jump out the way. Rinse and repeat. But then you get to Dante, and you're like, well, what in tarnation is this? What do I do? And to answer that question, you can do quite a few things. You can use Royal Release to time a parry so you can damage the shield, and then you also have Yamato, which you can hit the shield without any type of recoil. Some of this stuff isn't really as hinted as Nero being able to use his buster against a shield or certain structures in general, but with Dante, you more or less have to figure out how to overcome specific obstacles by yourself, which isn't that bad, but it gets a little bit more frustrating when you think about other things that comes into play, like jump canceling. Jump canceling in Devil May Cry has always been the holy grail when it comes to learning combos in any sort of fashion. You simply jump off an enemy while you're airborne. It allows you to cancel aerial attacks so you can reposition yourself or execute another aerial attack. While in DMC3, jump canceling, JC for short, wasn't too hard for people to pick up, at least for most people who were trying to learn how to jump cancel will eventually figure it out, DMC4 made jump canceling tough as nails. There are several factors that should be considered when you talk about the difficulty of JCing, and one of them is definitely how your character's moves work in tandem with each other, especially when it comes to performing combos in the air. If your moves have good synergy where the knockback of one move sets up a good position for you to use a different move on the enemy, then you will have an easier time on trying to figure out how to get a juggle going and how to continue it. For Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition, there are many characters that have strings and command moves that lead into very optimal situations for them. Situations where jump canceling may not be needed if you're trying to juggle an enemy in the air. This can allow a new person to kind of get the feel of aerial combat, so they can incorporate jump canceling if they want to. And then there's Virgil, who basically just breaks the entire game. Unfortunately for Dante, he has to use jump canceling if he wants to stay in the air effectively. Try as you might, you will only stay in the air for about 5 seconds until you plummet to the ground, like a rock. And then it dawns on you, shit, I gotta learn jump canceling if I want to stay in the air longer? I don't have Babby mode moves where I can just stay in the air? Nope, my brother, you are gonna get good, and you're gonna get good by jump canceling. And you know what that means, right? That means that you have to learn how to also weapon switch between your combos so that your combos don't become stale, so the style meter can drop. So you may think, okay, that's not too bad, but then you forget you got 3 different weapons that you have to use. And that's excluding all of his other mechanics like gun switching and style switching, which isn't really needed if you want to do combos in the air, but it makes it very helpful because you can branch off into different things. Now that's kind of a tall order to ask from a person that hasn't really dived into a character as complex as Dante. It creates an atmosphere where you have to learn a lot about the character so you can do things that other characters can do pretty efficiently. Even the act of launching a character in the air and then using another attack to basically kind of juggle them even further up into the sky requires kind of a certain amount of finesse if you use Dante. You have to launch the character, switch to Lucifer, use Ecstasy, which is a lock-on back input, hit the enemy with the rose, and then right after you hit the enemy with the rose, you have to jump cancel. Now, even for me, who's very, very experienced using Dante, I still have trouble trying to jump cancel Ecstasy within specific combos. That lets you know how difficult this is in order to pull off. Outside of managing Dante's mechanics in the air while also jump canceling, there's also another side to this where it makes jump canceling much harder than it really should be in most cases. And that is the hitbox collisions of the various enemies in this game. The enemies in Devil May Cry 4 has a lot of unique collision hitboxes where sometimes it just does not match up to the model itself. There's some enemies where you can just jump cancel to your heart's content because the collision hitbox is pretty big for you to actually deal with. And then there's others where it's like finding a needle in a haystack. I don't like, what is this? I don't understand this. DMC4 kind of makes it very, very important for you to pay attention to the position of yourself in relation to the enemy. So basically, if you're too low or too high to jump cancel an enemy, then most of the time you will probably just fail the jump cancel, or you might end up hitting the enemy and not being able to kind of recover to keep the enemy juggled. Now, this is also true to Devil May Cry 3 because there are some enemies that are pretty hard to jump cancel against, like the Fallen, but a good chunk of the enemies that you fight in Devil May Cry 3 can be jump canceled relatively easy. And then there's DMC5 where you can jump cancel till the cows come home because your hitboxes are the size of Trish's forehead, or 5 head, because it's DMC5. I don't know. But moving back to DMC4, the one unique thing about the game is that when you launch an enemy, it will face in the direction that it was facing in when you launched it. So if it's facing away from you, it will face away from you in the air, and vice versa if it's facing towards you. So you kind of have to pay attention to where the enemy's body is oriented at, so you have an easier time on jump canceling. So say if you're trying to juggle an armed scarecrow, for example. Well, in the front, he's actually very easy to jump cancel off of him. But if you're trying to jump cancel on the back of it, you have to position yourself a little bit higher than what you normally used to. Now take this and apply it to all of the other enemies that you fight in Devil May Cry 4. And then on top of that, add in the fact that each enemy has their own weight class that they belong in. Some enemies can only be launched by very specific moves, so there's some attacks that you'll use that won't have any type of launch back effects on that particular enemy. So if you're used to juggling one enemy in the air with a lot of aerial strings and combos that you figured out on your own, doing that to a different enemy won't yield the same result, which will make you frustrated, so you have to learn their weight class and figure out how to adjust your timings in order to get something going. Now, this is also applied to the other characters within Devil May Cry 4, but for Dante, this makes your journey on learning how to play this character effectively much, much harder. And then if you want to take his mechanics even further and learn how to do intricate combos like you see in combo videos, you're going to be climbing a very, very high wall. Not a knee-high wall, not a chest-high wall, but a very, very high wall. It's going to be over your head. Despite all of what I talked about, I think this aspect of Dante being difficult to play is kind of what makes the character Dante. Even with this version of Dante being the most difficult to play, I personally believe that he's also the most satisfying to get really, really good with. I don't know, I can't really describe it. It's just the way that he feels. I don't know why. It's just so satisfying to being able to do cool things like guard flying, star rave, and etc. Like it's just a whole bundle of joy. But anyway, I think that wraps up on how I pretty much feel about DMC4 Dante. Like he's really, really hard to get used to. That's not to say that the other version of Dante isn't hard at all, but I do believe that DMC4 Dante is just built different. As usual, thank you for watching, guys. I'm sorry that it took this long for me to make another video. Long story short, life happens. Going forward from now, I'm definitely going to start creating more content because I have a lot of ideas for you guys. So hopefully you will enjoy the future videos that I put out. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoy the video, and I will see you all next time.